It's strange how a journey can begin with so much hope and excitement, only to unravel into something unspeakable. My name is Elisa Lam, and I had always believed in the magic of exploration, of leaving behind the familiar to embrace the unknown. I was 21, fresh out of university in Vancouver, Canada. My parents, immigrants from Hong Kong, had worked tirelessly to give me a good life, and I wanted to honor their sacrifices. But first, I needed to do something for myself. I craved adventure, something to mark the transition into adulthood before settling down into a new routine. Los Angeles was my chosen destination, a city of dreams, lights, and stories waiting to be uncovered. It was the perfect place to escape the cold familiarity of home and find a spark of inspiration. I wasn't naive, though. Traveling alone meant being careful, especially as a young woman, but I was confident. When I arrived in LA, everything seemed so alive. The air hummed with an energy I'd only read about in books or seen in movies. I decided to stay at the Hotel Cecil. It was cheap, centrally located, and had a history, something that intrigued me. Sure, some reviews hinted at its darker side, but I wasn't easily spooked. From the moment I walked into the lobby, I felt something off. The place had an air of faded grandeur, like it had once been magnificent but now carried the weight of too many stories, too many secrets. I brushed it off. I wasn't here for the hotel. I was here for the city. Those first days were a whirlwind. I explored the streets, rode the buses, and marveled at how different everything felt from Vancouver. I called my parents regularly, reassuring them that I was safe and happy. And I was mostly. But there were small things I couldn't ignore. Strange sounds at night, an unsettling coldness in the air, and a nagging feeling that I wasn't alone, even when I clearly was. I told myself it was just nerves. After all, traveling alone for the first time could be overwhelming. I had no idea, in those early moments, that this trip would become something far darker than I ever imagined. The unease I'd initially felt didn't fade. It grew stronger with each passing day. The Hotel Cecil wasn't just old. It felt alive in a way that unsettled me. The air seemed to hum with whispers I couldn't quite catch, and shadows lingered in corners far too long. One night, I was in my room, scrolling through my phone, trying to drown out the creeping unease with music and social media. But something kept pulling my attention to the door. I couldn't explain it, a faint sound maybe, a sense of being watched. I laughed it off, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. Then came the first truly bizarre experience. I was heading to the lobby to grab a drink. As I stepped into the elevator, the door slid shut behind me, but it didn't move. I pressed the button for the lobby again. Nothing. Frustrated, I started pressing all the buttons, hoping one would trigger something. That's when I noticed the sensation, a faint, prickling cold creeping up my spine. The doors opened suddenly, but no one was there. Just an empty hallway, dimly lit and eerily quiet. I hesitated, my instinct screaming at me to stay inside the elevator. But curiosity got the better of me. I peeked my head out, scanning the corridor. There was nothing unusual, yet the air felt heavier, like something unseen was pressing down on me. Returning to my room didn't bring comfort. The atmosphere seemed to shift as soon as I closed the door. I started feeling on edge, like I couldn't sit still. That night, I barely slept. The next day, I resolved to ignore my anxiety and focus on the city. But even when I was out exploring, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was following me. I'd glance over my shoulder, only to see empty streets or people going about their day. Still, the sensation was so strong that I caught myself walking faster, avoiding alleys, and clutching my bag tightly. By the time I got back to the hotel that evening, my nerves were frayed. Stepping into the lobby, I caught the faintest whiff of something foul, rotting, damp, and earthy. I wrinkled my nose, but said nothing. Maybe it was just the city. Back in my room, I tried to calm down with a shower, but as the water ran over me, I heard a faint knocking sound. It wasn't coming from the door. It was behind me, from the bathroom wall. I turned off the water and stood there, holding my breath. The knocking stopped. That night, I decided to document my experiences. Writing always helped me process my thoughts. So I pulled out my journal and began scribbling down everything I'd seen, felt, and heard. I hoped it would help me make sense of it all. Little did I know, I was only scratching the surface of what the Hotel Cecil had in store for me. The following day started like any other, but it quickly spiraled into the strange and inexplicable. My plan was to spend the day exploring downtown, yet a nagging feeling rooted me to the hotel. I decided to stay in and catch up on journaling. By mid-afternoon, I ventured into the hallway to grab some ice. The elevator ride down was uneventful, but on my way back, something peculiar happened. I pressed the button for my floor, but instead of going up, the elevator stopped at a random floor. The doors opened, revealing a dark, deserted hallway. I stared at the empty corridor, half expecting someone to step into view. Nobody came. The air felt colder now, carrying a faint metallic tang that made me shiver. I pressed my floor's button again, willing the doors to close faster. As the elevator finally ascended, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The reflective surfaces inside the elevator seemed off, as if the shadows didn't quite align with the fluorescent lights above. That night, I tried to shake the strange experience from my mind by watching some videos online. That's when I stumbled upon something that froze me in my tracks. A news report featuring eerie security footage from the Hotel Cecil. In the video, a young woman stepped into the very elevator I had ridden earlier that day. She looked unsettled, pressing buttons almost at random, glancing nervously into the hallway. She moved erratically, almost like she was trying to hide or escape something unseen. It didn't take me long to realize who she was: Elisa Lam. The footage was dated just days before her disappearance. My stomach churned as I watched her strange behavior, stepping in and out of the elevator, peeking around corners, gesturing as though communicating with someone I couldn't see. I felt a chill run down my spine. The scene mirrored my own recent experiences. The malfunctioning elevator, the unnerving sensation of being watched, the cold, heavy air. The realization left me stunned. I closed my laptop and paced the room, my mind racing. Was it possible that whatever haunted Elisa was now targeting me? Or was I just letting my imagination run wild? Sleep was out of the question that night. Every creak of the old building, every distant sound, felt amplified. I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching my journal like a lifeline, unable to shake the thought that something sinister was lurking just beyond the walls. When morning came, I decided to ask the hotel staff about the footage, but their vague, evasive responses only deepened my unease. "Old building," they said, shrugging. "Things happen here sometimes." I left the conversation with more questions than answers. It was becoming increasingly clear that whatever was happening to me wasn't just paranoia. It was something real, something tied to the hotel and its dark history. The following night, I resolved to document everything. I kept my journal close and set my phone to record video while I slept, hoping to capture any disturbances. The tension in the air felt heavier now, as though the hotel itself was suffocating me. Around midnight, I lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, the dim light of my bedside lamp casting eerie shadows across the room. The sounds of the city outside seemed distant, muffled by the oppressive silence inside the hotel. Then it started. At first, it was subtle, faint whispers, just on the edge of hearing. They didn't come from the hallway or the neighboring rooms, but seemed to emanate from the very walls of my room. My breath quickened as I strained to make out the words, but they were indistinct, like fragments of conversations long forgotten. I sat up, clutching my journal, when a sudden crash startled me. The chair by the window had tipped over, its legs now pointing skyward, like some twisted omen. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. Silence. Then, I saw it, a shadow moving against the far wall. But it wasn't cast by the lamp or any discernible light source. It moved independently, flowing like ink in water. The shape took on a vaguely human form, tall, broad-shouldered, yet featureless. My heart pounded as it seemed to turn toward me, though it had no face, no eyes. And still, I could feel its gaze, cold and piercing, as though it could see straight into my soul. The whispers grew louder now, overlapping into a cacophony of disjointed voices. They weren't speaking English. or any language I recognized. The sounds were guttural, otherworldly, and filled with malice. Panicking, I reached for my phone, hoping the recording would validate what I was witnessing. But when I looked at the screen, the shadow wasn't there. The room appeared empty, save for me. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice cracking. The entity didn't retreat. Instead, it advanced, the room growing colder with each step it took. I could see my breath now, small clouds of panic in the icy air. In a desperate bid, I grabbed my journal and hurled it at the shadow. It passed straight through, hitting the wall with a dull thud. The shadow paused, almost as if it were mocking me, before it began to dissolve, melting back into the walls. The whispers faded, and the oppressive cold began to lift. But I knew this wasn't over. Whatever it was, it had made its presence known, and it was warning me. I wasn't safe. Not here, not anywhere. As dawn approached, I reviewed the recording on my phone. The footage showed me sitting up, staring at something unseen, shouting into empty air. But there was no shadow, no whispers, no tipped-over chair. I was left with nothing but my memories of the encounter and the sinking realization that I was truly alone in this. After the night of the shadow, I couldn't stay silent anymore. My fear had grown into a gnawing paranoia, and I needed answers. The hotel staff, though courteous, were evasive when I pressed them about strange occurrences. The guests I spoke to dismissed my questions, their expressions suggesting either disbelief or a shared secret they dared not speak aloud. Desperation drove me to the internet. I scoured forums and obscure websites, hoping to find stories of other guests who had stayed here and experienced similar horrors. Eventually, I stumbled upon a thread buried deep in an online discussion board. The title sent a chill down my spine: "The Curse of Room 203. The posts were a mishmash of urban legends and personal accounts, many of them eerily similar to mine. Whispers, shadows, objects moving on their own. One commenter mentioned a tragedy that occurred decades ago. A man had died in room 203 under mysterious circumstances, and ever since, guests reported feeling an oppressive presence. But it was the last post that made my blood run cold. If you see the shadow, leave immediately. It doesn't stop until it gets what it wants." That night, I decided to leave. I couldn't risk another encounter. I packed my bags hastily, my hands trembling with every item I stuffed into my suitcase. As I zipped it closed, the room seemed to groan in protest. The walls creaked, the air turned heavy, and the lights flickered erratically. Suddenly, the whispers returned, louder and more urgent than before. They were coming from all around me now, a chorus of anguished voices rising to a fever pitch. I grabbed my suitcase and bolted for the door, but as I reached for the handle, it wouldn't budge. The knob felt frozen, immovable, as though the room itself was trying to keep me there. The shadow appeared again, this time more defined, its form stretching taller and wider until it consumed nearly half the room. I could feel its anger, its hunger. It moved toward me, deliberate and unrelenting. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but the hallway outside was silent. The shadow's icy grip seemed to envelop the room, pressing against me, suffocating me. My thoughts blurred as panic took over. Then, with a sudden burst of adrenaline, I rammed my shoulder against the door. It flew open, and I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. The whispers stopped instantly, replaced by the eerie stillness of the hotel. I didn't look back. Dragging my suitcase behind me, I ran down the hall, past the elevator, and straight to the stairs. It wasn't until I was outside, standing under the harsh glow of the streetlights, that I allowed myself to breathe again. I left the hotel that night and never returned. But even now, in the safety of my home, I feel its presence. The shadow lingers in my mind, a dark stain that no amount of light can erase. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear the whispers again, soft, faint, but unmistakable. And I know deep down that it's not over. It will never be over.